Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast Redesigning Normal. This is Andrew Southern, your host, and I'm joined today by Tim Crowley, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at a development company called Left Lane. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
So I'll just start off and say that Tim and I know each other from a long time ago, and he's one of the main people I wanted to speak with on this podcast because his view into markets and the needs of consumers in real estate is second to none. So I wanted to have him on the show because I think that his outlook on this is unique and important. So thanks again, Tim, for joining us.
Happy to be here. I hope that your accolades prove out.
Well, I'm sure they will. So Tim, can you tell me a little bit about your role as a Chief Marketing Officer, just to start off for everybody in the audience?
Sure. So in the development world, I would say that the way that you can think about marketing is to think about it as how do you make an impact on the built realm with the consumer's perspective in mind, right? Because at the end of the day, the marketing that we're most conditioned to seeing is finished or recurrent product marketing. Ads for a cheeseburger, right? But there's very little in that sort of craft story that is informative back to the product. So what we try to do is aggregate as much information from the widest possible consumer base to make informed sort of real estate and architecture decisions such that our project will be well received by the widest audience.
And the audience is generally a residential audience or a commercial audience. Like, who do you have in mind here?
It really depends. So often it's the same person. It just depends on what point in the day you're catching them. So it's hospitality, so hotels and multifamily residential primarily.
Okay. So there was I don't know if you heard, there was a pandemic.
I did.
I think a certain group of people, probably the majority of us, became a little bit more aware of how our health in public spaces affects other people's health in public spaces and vice versa. I don't recall in my work previously in development having too much discussion about health technologies or health considerations.
No, or generally it was. Yeah, I mean, I had them. Some of them were odd, some of them were not. I had an issue. Actually, ended up killing a fairly large residential transaction, but it was about the proximity of the building's electric switchgear room, and the buyer was worried about EMPs. So that was my first sort of entree into that type of concern. But I would say predominantly we'd be concerned about some of the off-gassing of particular construction materials, paints, solvents, etc.
Okay.
VOCs, that kind of thing.
Have you heard, as things are sort of like starting to get maybe sort of going again, of developers starting to think about health considerations in their designs or in their offerings?
Yeah, I would imagine that the number is somewhere in the high 90% range of
Okay.
of developers that are thinking about, especially on maybe less on condos, because they sell them individually generally before it's operating. So any defects are sort of, that ship has sailed long ago. But if you're going to own an asset, so a multifamily building, an office building, or a hotel, or a shopping mall, then it is simply a question of dollars and cents. So if you have an outbreak at your mall or at your office, you are going to have to shut down. So it's not just because the consumer expectations are changing to have an answer for that kind of stuff, but it's also just a hard question of economics. So the cleaner you can keep your building, the the less likely you are to have to shut down a portion of all of that building to mitigate COVID or some other virus flare up.
So you would say that the sort of health and safety line item is now on the budget. Excuse me.
Yeah, they got it out of the trash. They got that line item out of the trash bin and duct taped it back to the budget.
So what do those discussions actually look like? Because I know you're again, we know each other from the past, and I've always loved the way that you design spaces. And when you're laying that stuff out, are you thinking about more space per person or bigger amenity floors? What does it actually end up being?
You know, you and I offline have had a lot of discussions about this. I mean, it's still at this point somewhat undefined. Exactly what the set of best practices are going to be for well, really two things. One is what is my air quality today, and then number two is I know we now track the data, so I know what my tough seasons are in terms of detecting flus or whatever it may be in the air. So having like a seasonal analytic approach. So I think that it's air quality is going to be a big conversation in every building that you spend any amount of meaningful time in. So we'll call it about as much time as you need to catch COVID, which is what, 15 minutes. So if you spend more than 15 minutes in a place, you're going to give a shit. Excuse me, I probably can't cuss on these things.
That's all right. It's okay.
You're gonna be pretty engaged about what the air quality is. So, and in terms now that is kind of a different set of problems, which are those related to HVAC or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, right? So, what are the technical supplements that can be added to your HVAC or MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing drawings and designs to avoid and then mitigate any sort of air quality issue in your building? And we're talking about sniffer tech that can detect a flu virus, right? Mm-hmm. And then it can detect it in a hallway and then immediately mitigate that section of the hallway.
Yep. So do you find, so maybe this conversation hasn't happened yet, but I know
it's happening. But the one on HVAC is they're like closed loop contained systems. So if you're thinking through how to make your HVAC system more robust to go beyond just like HEPA filters, but like really actively manage air quality in your building is one set of problems that at this point are all just on the drawing board, and they're relatively straightforward. You can either add or not add this technology to your your mechanical room. Now the other ones are the space planning or architectural considerations, because I think that the general default maneuver is to aggregate whatever amenity square footage you have into the biggest moment possible. So my consumer will be most impressed with me if my gym is the biggest and and most visible. But I think that certainly runs afoul to what may be a perennial seasonal masking. Like we may be doing social distancing and masking every flu season. Or at least some measure of the population will. So how do we think about that in a gym? Should we have smaller gyms? Should we have more and smaller break rooms and offices? Like how can we operate while sort of thinking through, if I have to divide my business into some sort of cohort of sick versus healthy or whatever it may be, that I need to have real estate that is a strategic response to that.
Right, an answer for the person who's asking you the questions.
Exactly.
And I know you as somebody who goes into meetings and sometimes has to have sort of frank discussions with the money women and men.
Yes.
and tell them sort of how it is. And it's not just you, right? There's architects, I'm sure, that are going to be coming to the same people and saying, look, we got to do we got to use some different materials in these sort of high touch places in order to, help keep people safe. And you might come to them and say, we have to do X, Y, and Z with this space. It's going to cost more, let's say.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to cost less. It's going to cost more to do X, Y, and Z. But as to your point earlier, think about what happens if we have to shut down this asset or this thing, this hotel.
Yeah. It's, that sort of catastrophic option. I mean, I guess that's where I really live in the real estate process now that we circle back, is that if you think about the group of professionals that touch a real estate development project, it doesn't matter if it's office, retail, multi, whatever, are sort of segmented into their individual pursuits, right? Like developers are organizing the capital stack and keep an eye on budget and sort of chasing contractors. Architects are designing. And then so we've sort of tried to put ourselves in the middle, which is there's no real feedback loop between a developer and an architect and the consumer that's coming in to see that product, right? Because they're not spending, a developer nor the architect is going to be the salesperson or whatever to, see how that whatever story they're trying to spin is being received. So what we try to do is be informed enough in architecture and construction that we can make sort of pound wise decisions very early in the development process.
Yeah, I've always seen like your role as exactly as you described it, and also being aware of what the competition is up to, like kind of like your ear to the ground.
That's certainly a big part of it. Not only what the competition is up to, but also, I mean, the research mechanisms that we have or go beyond that. Like, how is the consumer reacting to what the competition is up to? Right,
and that may not be information that even the real estate folks, the agents know, right?
You're aggregating it from, a lot of different sources. I mean, our clients are condo inventory loan lenders, or with the previous shop before joining Left Lane, but we just are triangulating so much raw data and enough anecdote to turn that into data that we're able to sort of be a real advocate for the eventual consumer sort of very early in the process. Although it's like the least envious job in terms of, because it's a new job, right? Like this idea that you would have people that sort of made life's work out of getting to know the consumer and then tried to convey that in design terms to an architect and developer is a weird spot to be in. Like,
because
happening?
sometimes
why is the broker breaking out trace paper?
Right, exactly, right. So sometimes the architect says, well, we already know what's needed, right? We need this mix of units, and the developer goes, we want to build a building that has this. And then you might come along and say, well, actually, based on the trend lines, like this is the data showing that we need a bunch of 3 and 4 bedrooms, as an example.
Yeah, that's a good one. And also, too, there's this reflex. I won't name any names, but it's basically everybody. That if you had a successful project previously, that every single element of that project was deemed to be a success.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so like a good example would be like 70 Vestry and Tribeca, the related project. If you try to have a discussion about like where things could have been optimized or whatever, like there's just look, it worked last time. Let's keep it simple and just do what we did at Vestry, because it had such an extraordinary market reception that even bad decisions get a pass, and that's where we find a lot of pretty rough edges, because we've been doing it the same way. I mean, that's honestly how we ended up with breakfast bars in every New York City 1-bedroom rental apartment, because in the mid '80s somebody thought it was cool and they just rocked it for 30 years.
Right. And it was like it worked, and we the asset made money, and so let's keep doing it. It seemed. And then you've got
and now it doesn't work at all.
Things are changing. right?
Yes.
Like the people that are buying these things or using these things are changing all the time. So the
Correct.
same recipe doesn't necessarily work. And then you get a bomb drop like COVID. And it's like,
Exactly.
okay, then what like what changes? There are some discussions that I have, Tim, where it's like nothing changes. Some people
Sure.
are for whatever reason that, and the good reasons, I'm sure, are interested in going right back to the way things were to protect the culture of their business or the culture of their school or whatever. Their trend lines are squarely in that direction. Whereas other markets and other people I speak to have to be a lot more, they have to react to this situation and then adjust for the future. My personal feeling is that there will be adjustments across multiple industries, some more severe than others, but nobody comes out completely unscathed or unchanged, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's right. Every discussion that I had around like the net impact of COVID, I think pretty consistently people believe that it's office space and hospitality that are the two kind of net losers, right? Certainly in the short term, but I think that the way that you have to think about it is, like you said, it is some degree of change to everyone. So, even some of the most traditional employers like Blackstone, have always been suit and tie every day, 5 days a week in the office, at any sort of leadership level. And they have considerably relaxed that approach. And I think that the wisdom is that they're not going back to that type of draconian management style, because they want their people to have flexibility and be able to spend time with their families or whatever it is. So it is changing 100% of things, and we'll see how much. By how much.
I had an interesting conversation with somebody not on this podcast. It's a surprise, a commercial real estate agent who was, okay, I think the word is bullish. Like he was excited because he felt as though if the old metric was that you needed 150 square feet per worker in your office, that yes, there's flexible space, or rather flexible time, and maybe that desire to have less space overall for your corporate office or whatever is a true thing. But it may be that now you need 200 square feet per employee.
Yeah, I've heard a similar argument.
And therefore, it's a net even, or maybe even a gain in leasable space to the Salesforce. Well, Salesforce is a bad example, but companies like that who are going to be more flexible but are going to need more space per person. Do you think that that's true, or is that just like wishful thinking?
I think that it sounds like some shit that a commercial real estate broker would come up with. I think it's probably true to some degree, but not as true as, oh, by the way, we figured out during COVID that we don't need the accounting department to be here. So we need 40% less office space. All right. So, and it also have a huge, huge impact on different building vintages. And, a big part of what we look at are PNC office buildings that are just literally, they're functionally obsolete to even take a lot of these corrective measures on modernization or column-free space. Like they were already on a pretty weak leg. So I think that there are industries and assets that will get hit harder than others. Like in hotels is a good example too. I mean, your average, limited service Hampton Inn, Holiday Inn Express is going to be 85% business travelers, right? And a higher end leisure asset is going to be maybe a quarter, 20%. Mm-hmm. So like business travel, especially the mid-tier business travel, is just one of those things that could legitimately just go away.
Business travel,
like from a kind of the mid-tier sales jobs, right? Like calling on clients at different offices to do sales, like whatever that may be. Mm-hmm. Could be life insurance products. It could be, technology solutions, rack space, whatever you want to be. But I think that entire universe of people that you literally used to leave their offices and go knock on doors all day, like that's just a different universe now.
Right. it's weird. I talk about these sort of like these three bands of sort of COVID responses from the public, and the way I look at it is like there's a band on top. They're parading around Miami at the moment, no masks.
Yeah.
Didn't ever want to wear masks. There's a band a wide band in the middle of people that took it seriously for everyone else's sake and for their own sake. And then there's a band at the bottom of people who are just like absolutely traumatized, even now, right now, legitimately traumatized. And that trauma across the bottom two bands will probably last for a while. But that lower band is the band that you have to you have to cater to a little bit, right? You have to basically coerce these people out of their houses over the next 12 to 18 months, I think, into public spaces where they can feel comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. I mean, I think it's probably not any different than, getting somebody on a flight who really didn't like it that much to begin with, and then just shaking their martini for 4 hours, and then try to get them on a flight again.
Right.
I think there's a lot of that. I think that it has been a tremendously uncomfortable experience. It has cost the cost in human lives is just beyond the wildest guess you could possibly come up with at the beginning of this thing, and so the economic toll as well, which then again goes on to have a life toll. Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary, and I think that for some meaningful measure of society, just like kicking it, going back to the way it was, jamming 30 people into an elevator during the middle of the flu season is going to just sound like it makes a lot less sense.
So I completely agree, and that is a huge problem from where you and I are from in New York, where it's like the day-to-day buzz of these commercial buildings in, let's say, Midtown.
It's crazy.
If they ever do fill back up again, I mean, the inefficiencies of that model now are pretty clear, right?
Yeah. Do you ever have to go to Slice's office?
No, where is it?
It's like Broadway and 36.
Okay.
The production architect,
yeah.
There's like a 50-person queue to get into their elevators every morning. I still can't figure it out, but I think that as an employer, you could very well be looking at new space simply because like elevatoring and getting into the building is inefficient. Now, things like direct dispatch are helpful. So for your audience, like direct dispatch is you tell a computer screen what floor you're going to, and then it assigns you to a particular elevator. So you can use direct dispatch to socially distance people into different elevators, even if they're going to the same floor or proximate floors. I think that'll help. But like you said, the amount of redundancy that we're going to need, across our entire known universe is going to be pretty extraordinary.
I've been thinking about this for about a year now. Like, because as a technology consultant, like I can speak to some of the technologies, like the air filtration. We've got the ability to tell if people have fevers. We can tell right now if people have fevers coming into a building. I didn't know that was your expertise. I just thought you stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So that's one of those things that like, and you'll be interested I'm sure you already knew this. There are certain management companies in New York City, for instance, that are hesitant to use that system that scans for fevers, for instance. It doesn't slow anybody down. You can just walk into the building just like any other security camera, but this one's sensing if you have a fever, right? Sure. The concern is, as a building management, I don't want to stop someone from getting to that meeting because they have a fever. I also don't want to be liable if I have these cameras set up and somebody does end up getting sick in the elevator that I should have found them. I should have seen them in the fever scanner, right? So the idea is basically to just walk away from the entire process so that there's no liability.
Oh, because if you make an earnest attempt to engage the liability, then you are admitting liability. Yeah,
correct.
That's the U.S. for you right now.
Exactly.
It's extremely. If you try, you're going to get sued. So don't try.
But that same conversation occurred back when, just regular video cameras were sort of becoming more and more popular a long time ago. And it was like, if I put up these cameras and somebody gets mugged on the street outside, I should somehow should have been monitoring those cameras and figured that was happening, and then, intervened, I guess. So
yeah, I think that's just going to be a process. I think that it will change. And the example I gave you when we were talking about it the other week was that I think it was in the 1970s, maybe earlier, but the pilots unions raised holy hell about cockpit voice recorders.
Right.
Absolute holy hell, invasion of privacy, liability, all the other stuff. But if it's one of those things that just makes so much sense, like we should tell someone if they have 101 fever that, hey man, you've got 101 fever, you need to go home.
Go home and rest. That's what we've learned. Now, right. Fever doesn't mean that you have COVID. Fever doesn't even mean that you're sick, but it is a sign that you could be sick, right? And so to ignore that technology, to me, has been a little frustrating. I will say that there are many industries that are we're doing this, right? Factories, because they can't afford to have an outbreak at a meat packing plant, right? Or
it also gives a natural hiring advantage on a macro scale to life sciences companies, right? That they've got sort of lab space in their office, negative air pressure systems, and all that other stuff. I think that it becomes a real selling feature for them.
I think in a way, I feel like you're kind of like a real estate politician, because a politician in my mind has to jump into different categories throughout the day and sort of be aware of what's going on and see these different places, these different things that are happening. Something's happening in China, and then there's something domestic that I have to deal with. And in a way, the way that you speak to different people along the sort of building development chain, from owners to architects to real estate agents to consumers, is sort of like that, sort of like a politician for development.
That's the nicest way anybody has ever told me that I was full of shit.
That's
absolutely, bar none.
I think that politicians play an important role, right? And
they sure do.
They set, really, they're the ones that make the gears go around, whether you believe in those systems or not.
Yeah. I like to think of myself as just more of a generalist, and I have a natural curiosity about the built environment, and a really extraordinary curiosity about how people move through it, and whether it's working spaces, commuting spaces, or living spaces. I think there's always an opportunity to optimize if you can just figure out a way to slow down and listen to the consumer, and say, hey, now that people get Uber Eats a lot, so we don't cook as much. So what would be really great is, instead of the U-shaped dead-end breakfast bar in my one bedroom, what if that island was open on either end and we can circulate around it and eat around it? So I think in general, and this is a good thing for the world of real estate, is if you haven't been correctly incentivized over the last year to look at conventions and say, we need to examine what we assumed was just the way we did stuff, and have a real conversation about its value, the gymnastics of whatever that thing is, and is it sustainable and repeatable? I think that just being well, it worked last time, is so 2019.
Right. Let me ask you a sort of final follow-up question.
Sure.
If you're a consumer, you have a family, let's say you're moving to a new market. Let's say you're moving to Austin, or maybe Austin.
Sorry, I hit the Siri button on accident. You have to ask me that one again.
Let's say that you're relocating to a new market in the U.S.
Yep.
And you're looking at living in a building. What, as a consumer, what would you be looking for? What would make you feel good looking at new assets to maybe buy or rent? In terms
as the consumer, meaning
as a consumer, yeah.
What made me feel okay, this person is sort of hearing me, as understanding sort of what the needs are and sort of aggregating them into change.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, look, we all have our own sort of specific desires and picadillos when it comes to residential spaces. And I think, I don't know, I would imagine that many of your listeners live in multi-unit dwellings just like we do. So it's a bit of a different experience than living in a house. But I think that the things that I want to see are a meaningful and obvious plan for keeping me and my family safe, right? And I've always thought of that. I think like everyone has that's always been okay. Safe from fire, flood, and crime, right? So does this building do an adequate job of keeping my family dry and safe? But now the question of safety has an entirely different component. Like,
Right.
okay, how do I keep my kids from getting the flu because they got in an elevator that somebody with the flu was just in 30 seconds ago? Right. That's a new thing. So those things are going to have to be considered. They are going to be the types of considerations that I'm going to have on the development side, and I think they would naturally emerge as considerations in my sort of non-professional endeavors.
All right. One more follow-up question, and then I'm going to let you go. What does the hotel experience look like that make you comfortable for 2 nights stay?
Man, there really isn't one like at this very moment because, I stayed at the Arlo last week, and just because I was diving in for a couple nights, and every door had this like faux seal on it. If the seal is broken, call the front desk. Of course, they're all broken. So I think that in small urban hotels that require a lot of density and turnover to make a profit, I think that it's hard to get comfortable, feeling like that they've got their shit in a pile and they've examined all of these issues, and what they came up with was just a couple bottles of Purell on the front desk. If that is the response, the total response for a hotel, then I think it's failing. As you know, the assets that we work on, we're every possible interaction with the consumer, we are examining to either eliminate, optimize, or improve it. So I don't know. It doesn't feel as if whatever intelligence could have gotten its way into hotels and into office buildings and into residential buildings, it doesn't feel like all that stuff ever got there in a way that was sort of universally available to the residential and hospitality world.
Yeah, I haven't done enough traveling recently to like see the differences beyond, like you said, there's like a seal on the door, right?
Yeah.
And there's some hand sanitizer in the lobby. And I think that there's a pretty strong like element of people who are just like, once this is over and everyone's like safe again, like let's go back to the way things were. I liked the way things were. Like I think.
Yeah, and I think
there's another version of this podcast that's like I liked the way things were, .com.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you would after 9/11, you would never imagine that like downtown would be back where downtown is today. So if you give something enough time and enough purpose and enough thoughtful consideration, I think it'll generally come around. But it's just going to be different. That's all. But I am one of those guys when I go to a hotel, like I get a towel and I jam it under the crack in the door to at least mitigate like somebody walking by my room and coughing and the air getting sucked into the room as air will do. And Bob's your uncle, you got COVID, and I'm scared of it. Like so I'm definitely scared of it.
Me too. Do you, if you go on a plane, do you wipe down the stuff with your own wipes?
Yeah.
I started doing that.
And I have these really weird picadillos. Like I said to a buddy of mine, I said, what kind of guy would you think that I was if 2 years ago, or I came to you 2 years ago with a real beef about people carrying crappy Purell, in their building lobbies, like that you would think I was the weirdest dude in the world.
Yep.
If that was like
That's totally changed.
my big thing, and now it's like when somebody has like a Purell that burns your hands off, it's annoying. So I have a hand sanitizer, pet peeve. Like, who knew?
Wait, you have a pet peeve that people don't use it, or that they do?
No, I have a pet peeve when a building management company puts out really crappy hand sanitizer.
And it's like oily and it stays.
It's like kerosene basically.
Yes.
And like you can't get rid of it. Yeah, so that's now like a pet peeve of mine. So what a unique pet peeve to have.
Well, exactly. All right. Well, Tim, I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate your time on the podcast and being on the podcast. Thank you.